You know, earlier in the conversation you mentioned your cousins, and I want to touch upon your uncle Izzy Asper. Mr. Asper is obviously one of Canada's greatest entrepreneurs who built from nothing. But that's not the story I always remember you telling. I always remember you telling me the Auschwitz story and how you learned to put things in perspective. Do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, no, for sure.
So why don't you walk us through the greatest lesson Izzy Asper ever taught you?
Well, the slight correction is it wasn't actually that uncle. It was a different uncle who taught me the lesson. Izzy, thank God, in our family that came out of Odessa at that time came out prior to that happening. But it was on my mother's side of the family that we had an uncle who was an orphan, in fact, not even a blood relative of ours, who had survived Auschwitz and quite a horrific existence as a child laborer in Auschwitz and Treblinka for almost, Auschwitz and Birkenau for almost 4 years. And when the Red Cross began a campaign to allow Jewish families to adopt orphans from the war, my uncle had been put on the list, but unfortunately there were more orphans than there were families. And he was standing in a line at I think he was in Cyprus at a retention camp, and standing beside an old man who he didn't know, and the American soldier read out the name Benny Cates, and in Judaism, the last name K-A-T-Z is pronounced Katz, not Cates. And the American soldier read out Benny Cates, and this old man shoved him forward and said, "You're Benny Cates." And he had known that this child, Benny Cates, had died years before. So he kept the name, our family adopted him in North America, and you know, in getting to know him and getting to know the story, I always try to put in perspective, you know, both for my own life, and I struggle with this like anyone else does. You know, we're the first and second generations born out of conflict and born out of serious global hardship. You know, I always ask myself the question, you know, am I having a bad day? Is it, and I always use the expression, is it Auschwitz bad? Because if it isn't Auschwitz bad, it's fine.
So some days as an entrepreneur, because you're so close to it, what you're saying is it feels like it's the end of the world, but that perspective helps you to see clearly.
When you hit those dark moments, you got to go darker. And when you go darker, that's when you start to realize it's actually not so bad.
It's not so bad, the life we live in.